Um, Leaving aside the RAF flights, there were eventually two sets of flights on the American side, the US Air Force and the CIA. How did this come about?
In fact, there were two sets of US Air Force flights. There was one plane, and then there was a multiple entry, which I think involved like 9 aircraft on. And essentially, the first one was shortly after. There must have been a political change after the RAF flights, and shortly afterwards, the latest reconnaissance aircraft used by the Americans, the RB-47C, that was. Which was even more, it had a higher, longer range and higher altitude. One of the crews was assigned to go in fly up over Norway and come in through Murmansk, and then do a lot of photography. I'm not sure whether it was radar or actual, standard picture photography of the route down from Murmansk through the Soviet Union. They were obviously looking for, Air Force bases, Soviet Air Force bases there. And so up they went, off they went round, they go over Murmansk, they start to penetrate through, but by this time the MiGs are getting much better, and they find they've got MiGs on their tail, and one of the MiGs actually lands a cannon shell and knocks out their radio. Now they finished the job, and the Americans are not quite as stiff upper lip, but they still have their sort of pragmatic, bemused side. And I was told this story by people who've been on it, and they made their way back, and of course no one knew what had become of the radio. The radio had gone out, and they missed their refueling, and essentially they got back to England with. As they would describe it, with about 2 drops of fuel still in their tanks, and fuel leaking out of the back where the shell had gone off. So that was quite dramatic. I think they got what they set out to get, but this was beginning to show that the Soviets were beginning to match up to the problem. What then happened was that there was a major strategic air command, that's the big American bomber, their equivalent bomber command base in Thule, and that's up in Greenland. And this Air Force base was the sort of outpost where they sent a number of penetration operations during 1956. As I recall, I think it was 2 sets of 9 simultaneous penetration, again using RB-47 aircraft, and they went in. And all of them went in, did what they had to do. They saw MiGs, but I don't think any of them got intercepted or hit. So that was very much the second part of this. So what you've got up to 56 is the US Air Force doing the big penetration flights. But what you're getting is the Soviet air defences are getting very, very dangerous, and the work they knew years before Gary Powers was shot down in the U-2 that if they lost an aircraft, that would be a very bad diplomatic,
major diplomatic embarrassment,
and could cause potentially provocative to the point of war. So that was all a bit uncomfortable. And then what you see is that there's a piece of politics going on, because by 56, 57, the president and the politicians are beginning to realise that the Strategic Air Command are using their intelligence information to claim that the Soviets are growing at an ever-expanding. So you get what they call the bomber gap, which is the claim that the Soviets have far more bombers that are much more powerful than the United States. So we must have. So they were basically generating the intelligence to build up their own organisation.
And the reality was the reverse, wasn't it?
The reality we now know was the reverse. But the suspicions in Washington at the time was the Strategic Air Command and the US Air Force the best people to record this, to actually do the intelligence? So they said, well, no, we'll give it to the CIA. Also, they needed a new generation of aircraft. So this is where you see the U-2. There had been other flights going on, and what they've been using was the British aircraft known as the Camera, variant on the Americans started building it under what they call the B-57, and this aircraft it went up way over 50,000 feet, which was good and high. But the Americans still wanted to get higher, where they'd be completely out of what they thought would be. Even they didn't think, they frequently didn't believe the Soviets would be able to spot them. So what you get is the U-2 being developed, and of course that comes into play really about 1960, and there are a series of flights which appear to have ended with the shoot down of Gary Powers, but in fact didn't.
Yeah. And how many of those U-2 flights were there? Because they were comparatively small in number, weren't they?
Well, the exact number is hard to tally, but we are talking about a small number because they were sensitive. That they did realise that if they were being logged or anybody got shot down, it would cause a major diplomatic episode. So you had a handful of these flights. What wasn't generally recognised until the 90s, and partly because of the film, was that the RAF did actually have They have 4 pilots trained on them, and 2 of those pilots flew over the Soviet Union.
So when did the U-2 program end?
The U-2 program never really ended. It's just it was used for after Gary Powers was shot down.
Yes.
They didn't fly it really into the Soviet Union again, but it was used against China for quite a long while. In fact, quite a few Taiwanese pilots were shot down in U-2s, and they were used for a lot of different things. So they kept going for many, many years until they were superseded by more spy flight aircraft.
Yeah.
We don't know still what aircraft like the Blackbird, and there were a whole variety of these sort of supersonic jets who could go at Mach 3.
And they then became aircraft that could not be seen by radar.
Exactly, and you've got stealth rate. And the other thing, of course, is it all begins to get rather superseded by satellite, and that they could actually get lots of information via satellite. So the need to fly a human being over a contested area didn't really need to happen anymore.
And one of the things you claim in the programme was that President Eisenhower banned further overflights, but that the head of Strategic Air Command, Curtis E. LeMay, continued to make them. Do you really believe that the President didn't know about these flights?
I interviewed General Andrew Goodpaster, and he was the defence aide to Eisenhower with responsibility for exactly this area. And he said to me categorically, Eisenhower was against spy flights and did not know about these spy flights. And he would have been appalled had he known. Now, when you look through the record, there's no evidence. Goodpaster was an extraordinarily reliable person. And quite frankly, Strategic Air Command had a long history of deliberately being provocative, doing things they weren't supposed to. They saw it all part of their World War II gung-ho, get anything done tradition. But, one of the things that came out in the work of all this was that was whether Curtis LeMay, who was the head of Strategic Air Command, his deputy, had a secret plan to try and provoke the Soviet Union using spy flights. And if that sounds ludicrous, I have to tell you that we came across a war game strategy that was worked and planned, huge, called Project Control, which was about exactly that, about how you provoked the opposition into, so that you could create a sort of preventative war situation. Because what isn't still really addressed, and it's so sensitive. When I was there, I had academics who were frightened to talk about this kind of thing. But there is no doubt in my mind that in the 50s, in the early 50s, a lot of senior American generals wanted to force a war with the Soviet Union while they still had superior equipment.
While they were ahead.
While they were ahead.
Yeah.